It all began quietly, almost like nothing unusual was happening at all. From the outside, the world seemed calm. Cities were bustling. Oceans were full of ships going about their normal business, and people were living their daily lives without a second thought. But beneath the surface, in offices filled with maps, computer screens, and stacks of reports, something serious was stirring. Senior officials in international security circles were starting to notice patterns that didn't make sense. Unexplained movements of military ships, sudden changes in trade routes, and unusual communications between certain nations were beginning to form a worrying picture. At first, it seemed like minor irregularities, small details that could easily be dismissed. But the more the officials studied them, the more the signs pointed toward a threat that could not be ignored. Among the people noticing this, there was one man who had spent decades working quietly behind the scenes. He had seen conflicts flare up and die down. He had observed nations make mistakes and recover. And he had spent countless hours analyzing intelligence that most people would never even know existed. He had a reputation for being calm under pressure, for seeing connections where others only saw chaos. It was the kind of work that most people would never understand, looking at lines on a map and trying to predict the moves of people they had never met. But this time, something felt different. There was a sense of urgency in the data he was receiving, a quiet alarm that told him something much bigger was happening than anyone yet realized. He spent hours poring over satellite images, tracking the movement of ships across the oceans. He read communication, intercepts, and reports from field agents, looking for patterns. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. A single nation was making calculated moves that could destabilize entire regions. They were sending ships into sensitive areas, testing defenses, and pushing boundaries that had long been respected. Each step was small, almost invisible if you weren't paying attention, but together they formed a clear strategy. The implications were enormous. If the situation continued unchecked, it could threaten not only the security of nearby nations but also global trade and civilian lives. It was not a distant problem, it was a ticking clock, and the countdown had already begun. Despite the gravity of what he had found, the official knew that jumping to conclusions would be dangerous. He double-checked every piece of information, cross-referencing reports from multiple sources to make sure nothing had been misinterpreted. Intelligence can be messy, full of errors and false alarms. One wrong step could cause panic, or worse, provoke unnecessary conflict. But as he dug deeper, the inconsistencies disappeared, and the threat became undeniable. This was not speculation. This was real. Someone was testing the limits, and if the world didn't respond, the consequences could be catastrophic. Meanwhile, back in the offices where diplomats and leaders made their decisions, there was a sense of disbelief. Many could not imagine that a single nation would take such bold steps without thinking through the consequences. Some assumed it was a bluff, a way to show strength without intending to act. But the senior official, drawing on his years of experience, understood the pattern. History had shown him that when small, incremental moves are made with precision, they often lead to bigger actions. Small provocations could quickly escalate into major crises, and hesitation could be fatal. The pressure on him grew. He had to act, but carefully. Every move had to be calculated, because the wrong decision could turn a quiet crisis into a global disaster. As he prepared his report for the International Security Council, he thought about the lives that could be affected. Civilians living near disputed waters, sailors on trade ships, families who depended on the safe flow of goods. All of them were unknowingly at risk. He had spent so much of his career analyzing abstract data, numbers, and charts, but this time the stakes were painfully human. It was no longer just intelligence, it was a moral responsibility. He knew that warning the right people at the right time could prevent tragedy, and he also knew that failing to act could lead to consequences that might never be forgiven. The tension grew as meetings were held behind closed doors. Leaders debated the seriousness of the situation, weighing diplomacy against the potential need for military response. Some were reluctant to act without concrete proof, fearing the political fallout. Others were growing impatient, sensing the threat but unsure of how to mobilize a response. In these tense discussions, the senior official played a key role. He was the calm voice in the room, presenting facts clearly and without exaggeration. He explained the movements, the patterns, and the potential consequences. Slowly, the room began to understand what he had seen all along. This was not a drill. This was not a minor incident. Something serious was unfolding, and if it wasn't addressed, it could spiral beyond anyone's control. Intelligence agencies worked around the clock. Analysts in dark rooms, lit only by the glow of their computer screens, mapped fleets, tracked signals, and interpreted communications. Every detail mattered. A single misread could lead to disaster. The tension was almost tangible. Phone calls came at odd hours. Alerts were sent across secure networks, and urgent meetings were scheduled with little notice. The world outside seemed oblivious to the storm quietly gathering beneath the surface. But inside these secure rooms, time felt compressed, and every minute counted. The official also thought about the global impact. He knew that a crisis in one region could have ripple effects around the world. Trade disruptions, economic losses, and potential conflicts could affect millions of people who had no idea what was happening. he felt the weight of that responsibility heavily. The situation demanded not only careful analysis but also decisive action. He realized that the next steps he recommended could change the course of events entirely. If the world did not respond wisely, the consequences would be felt far beyond the immediate area of tension. It was a rare moment when one person could influence so much, and he understood both the privilege and the danger of it. The silent threat had been identified, its potential impact assessed, and the first steps toward a response were being considered. The official had done his part. He had gathered the facts, interpreted the intelligence, and sounded the alarm to those who could act. What remained was the unknown, how the nations of the world would respond, and whether a crisis could be averted before it became something uncontrollable. For now, though, he could only prepare, knowing that the real challenge was just beginning. Every decision, every call, and every moment of hesitation could shape the outcome of what was quietly becoming one of the most critical moments in recent history. After the silent threat had been identified, the world seemed to hold its breath. Though most people went about their daily lives completely unaware of what was unfolding behind the closed doors of governments and security offices. For the senior official who had first recognized the danger, the urgency had only grown. He knew that intelligence alone was not enough. Action was required, and it had to be precise. Any mistake or delay could give the aggressor the advantage. He spent hours weighing options, consulting trusted aides, and analyzing historical precedents. Every scenario he considered had risks, and every risk had consequences that could ripple across the globe. This was not a situation where one could act impulsively. It required strategy, coordination, and most importantly, courage. The moment of decision came quietly, in a small office lined with maps and communication devices. He picked up the secure phone and began making calls to international partners, one after another. These were calls that had been planned for years, though no one had expected to use them in a real emergency so soon. Where were emergency contacts between allied nations, set up to coordinate action in the case of extreme threats? What made this moment extraordinary was that a single phone call, or a series of them, could trigger a chain reaction. In those few minutes, decades of agreements, training, and coordination began to come alive. Messages were sent across encrypted lines, alerts were dispatched to naval and military commands, and preparations that had only existed on paper began to take tangible form. The world's naval commanders received the alerts almost simultaneously, and the reaction was immediate. Ships began moving toward strategic positions. Submarines shifted quietly beneath the waves, and fleets that had once existed only as concepts in joint plans now became visible and active. It was a level of coordination never before witnessed on such a scale. Each commander understood the gravity of the situation. They did not know exactly what would happen when the fleets converged, but they knew that speed and precision were critical. For many of them, it was a moment they had trained for their entire careers but had never imagined would come to life. There was a sense of urgency mixed with awe, a feeling that they were now part of something far bigger than themselves, a moment in history that few would ever truly understand. Behind the scenes, the senior official monitored every move closely. He knew that communication failures, delays, or misunderstandings could derail the entire operation. Each update from the field, every report of fleet movements or readiness checks, was scrutinized. He coordinated constantly with diplomats, military advisors, and intelligence officers, ensuring that every nation involved understood their role and the seriousness of the situation. Despite the tension, there was a quiet satisfaction in seeing the plan begin to unfold. Years of preparation, countless meetings, and decades of alliances were finally proving their worth. The world's response, once theoretical, was now real, and it was formidable. As the fleets moved, news began to leak through controlled channels, enough to alert governments and major organizations, but not enough to cause public panic. Analysts and reporters began to notice unusual movements of naval assets, and speculation started to grow. Governments issued statements emphasizing vigilance and readiness, careful not to inflame fear. The senior official understood that perception was just as important as action. If the world reacted with panic, the situation could spiral out of control. Maintaining calm while demonstrating readiness was a delicate balance, one that required skill, patience, and an unwavering focus on the facts. Meanwhile, on the ground, the people carrying out the orders felt the weight of responsibility. Sailors checked their ships repeatedly, pilots reviewed flight plans, and support staff ensured that every detail was accounted for. The sudden activation of plans that had been dormant for years was a shock to some, but training and discipline took over. Every member of the operation knew that their actions were part of a larger purpose to prevent a crisis from escalating into disaster. There was no time for doubt, only the clear understanding that their efforts could save lives, protect trade, and maintain peace. In a way, the world had shifted from a quiet, everyday rhythm to a state of readiness that was both intense and profoundly human. Everyone involved felt the importance of their role, even if the public would never know it. As the fleets approached strategic positions, tensions ran high. The senior official knew that the aggressor nation would notice these movements and might respond unpredictably. Diplomats worked furiously to open communication channels, to send warnings, and to prevent misinterpretation. Every message had to be precise, every action calculated. Misreading intentions in a moment of heightened alert could trigger confrontation. At the same time, the display of unity and readiness was a powerful message. The world's response, coordinated across continents, demonstrated strength and resolve that could deter any aggressive move. The idea that so many nations could act as one, moving swiftly to respond to a single threat, was unprecedented. The senior official could feel history unfolding before his eyes, an extraordinary moment in which decades of preparation and human effort converged in real time. In the midst of all this, he also had to consider the human element. Sailors, pilots, and commanders were under enormous pressure. Families were worried, schedules disrupted, and lives temporarily upended. He understood that even a successful operation would leave emotional marks on those involved. Still, he focused on the bigger picture, knowing that sacrifices made in the moment could prevent much greater loss. He remained in constant communication with his team, offering guidance, reassurance, and updates. His calm and measured approach became a stabilizing force for everyone around him. While the situation was unprecedented, it was also a testament to preparation, collaboration, and trust built over years of work. The momentum built rapidly, and within hours, what had started as a series of discreet warnings had become a full-scale coordinated response. Military exercises that were once theoretical were now reality. Naval fleets moved in synchronized patterns, ready to defend critical areas, protect civilians, and uphold international agreements. Air surveillance planes monitored key locations, ready to report any changes in the situation. Submarines and support vessels quietly assumed positions, forming a complex and invisible network of deterrence. It was a remarkable transformation from quiet intelligence warnings to full mobilization, demonstrating the capacity of nations to act decisively when faced with a credible threat. The world was now watching a silent yet powerful display of readiness, and the stakes had never been higher. The initial call had set in motion a chain of events that no one could ignore. A single decision, made by a careful and experienced official, had activated plans that now spanned the globe. The fleets were moving, the nations were communicating, and the world was on alert. What had been theoretical coordination had become a living, breathing operation with real people, real ships, and real consequences. The aggressor nation could no longer act without knowing that the world was prepared to respond. It was a moment of extraordinary tension and unprecedented collaboration. A reminder that sometimes, a single call can change the course of history. The world had begun to move as one, and the outcome of the crisis now depended on how the next phases unfolded. As the fleets moved into position, the world began to feel the weight of what was happening, even if most people did not fully understand it. From high above in command centers and aboard naval ships, the coordinated movement of vessels was a sight to behold. What had once been a theoretical plan now became reality. Nations, many of whom had been rivals or competitors, were now acting as one. The senior official watched everything unfold with a mix of pride and anxiety. He knew that this level of cooperation, on such a scale, had never been attempted before. Yet here it was, happening in real time. It was a demonstration of strategy, trust, and decades of careful diplomacy. Every ship that moved, every submarine that slipped silently beneath the waves, and every aircraft that patrolled the skies was a piece of a vast, intricate puzzle, one that could prevent disaster if executed correctly. The fleets began to converge near the strategic points that intelligence had identified as critical. These were areas where the aggressor nation could make the most impact, either by threatening trade routes or asserting dominance over contested waters. As the ships arrived, their crews maintained strict discipline. Sailors and officers moved with precision, following protocols they had drilled countless times but now had real-world consequences. The scale was astonishing. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, and submarines from multiple nations formed a network of defense, and yet there was an elegance to the coordination. Each vessel had a role, each commander understood their part in the plan, and all were linked by communication channels that allowed instantaneous updates and instructions. The operation had become a living entity, a demonstration of global unity that had never been seen before. For the senior official, monitoring this convergence was a mix of relief and tension. He knew that visibility was crucial. The presence of so many fleets near key areas sent a clear signal. The aggressor nation could no longer act without knowing that the world was watching, ready to respond. At the same time, he understood that the situation was delicate. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, could spark a confrontation that might escalate beyond control. Diplomats were working tirelessly in parallel, sending messages and opening channels to prevent misinterpretation. The goal was not confrontation, it was deterrence. Every action taken was calculated to prevent conflict while showing strength. It was a balancing act between power and restraint, between readiness and diplomacy, and it required constant attention. On the decks of the ships, crews worked with a quiet sense of purpose. Sailors checked weapons systems, reviewed protocols, and prepared for every possible scenario. Pilots conducted final checks on aircraft, ensuring that reconnaissance missions could be carried out effectively. Even the smallest support teams understood their role, from maintaining engines to managing logistics. Every individual felt the gravity of their responsibility. Unlike training exercises or simulations, this was real. Lives, trade, and international stability were at stake. There was a sense of tension that ran through the ranks, but also pride and recognition that they were part of something historic. They were not just serving their nations. They were serving humanity by ensuring that a single threat would not escalate into global chaos. The coordination extended beyond the fleets themselves. Intelligence analysts worked in constant shifts, monitoring the situation and providing real-time updates. Satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and reports from reconnaissance missions were analyzed continuously. Any small movement by the aggressor nation was scrutinized, evaluated, and communicated to commanders. The pace was relentless, but the operation had to be precise. The senior official knew that even a minor error could compromise the entire plan. Yet, despite the stress and the enormous stakes, the system functioned with efficiency and professionalism. It was a rare moment when human planning, technology, and discipline came together perfectly, forming a shield that could prevent conflict without firing a single shot. As the fleets assumed their positions, a strange sense of calm descended over the operation. There was tension, yes, but there was also confidence. The sheer scale of the mobilization demonstrated to the world and to the aggressor that the threat could not succeed. Diplomats in conference rooms and ships at sea shared a silent understanding. The purpose of this global response was to prevent conflict, not to start it. The unity of nations, previously theoretical or aspirational, had now become a tangible reality. It was a reminder that preparation, communication, and trust could accomplish extraordinary things, even in moments of extreme danger. The senior official reflected on the human element of the operation. He thought about the countless individuals whose daily lives had been interrupted by the mobilization, the sailors far from home, the support staff coordinating logistics, and the families who worried in silence. These were ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances, performing their duties with courage and discipline. Their collective effort was the reason the operation could succeed. It was a testament to human resilience and cooperation, proving that when people unite toward a common purpose, they can accomplish what once seemed impossible. The official felt a deep respect for every individual involved, recognizing that the operation's success depended not just on strategy but on the commitment of thousands of people who trusted one another to do their part. Meanwhile, the global situation continued to evolve. News channels reported unusual naval movements, prompting speculation and concern. Governments issued carefully worded statements to reassure citizens while emphasizing vigilance. The senior official understood that controlling perception was as important as controlling action. The world needed to see a united front, a demonstration of readiness that would discourage aggression without creating panic. Every press release, every public statement, was coordinated with the operations at sea, ensuring that diplomacy and military strategy worked hand in hand. It was a rare and delicate balance, requiring foresight, patience, and careful judgment. As hours passed, the fleets began to operate in a seamless pattern. Reconnaissance aircraft monitored the waters, submarines patrolled unseen, and surface ships maintained positions that maximized coverage while minimizing risk. The coordination was extraordinary. Rival nations that had historically mistrusted one another now operated with precision, sharing information and following joint protocols. It was a display of global unity that few could have imagined possible. The senior official observed the operation with a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. The display of coordinated strength had already begun to send a message. The world could act decisively when threatened, and the consequences of aggression would be swift and overwhelming. The operation had reached its peak of coordination. What began as a single call to activate emergency plans had grown into a fully mobilized, highly disciplined response that spanned oceans and continents. The fleets were in place, the crews were ready, and intelligence systems were operating at full capacity. The senior official understood that the next steps were critical. The world had demonstrated its capability to act as one, but the ultimate goal was still deterrence. Conflict had not yet erupted, and the opportunity to resolve the situation peacefully remained. This moment, this extraordinary convergence of people, planning, and purpose, had shown what humanity could achieve when faced with a serious threat. It was a rare glimpse of global cooperation in its most powerful and effective form, a reminder that, sometimes, the greatest victories are those achieved without firing a single shot. The fleets had reached their positions, their coordination flawless, and yet the tension did not ease. The senior official understood that the most dangerous moments were still ahead. The presence of so many ships, submarines, and aircraft was meant to deter aggression, but the aggressor nation could still react unpredictably. Every minute felt heavy, every decision critical. Commanders on the ships watched the horizon with quiet intensity, aware that a single misstep, whether from miscommunication, technical error, or human judgment could trigger a chain reaction that no one wanted. The world seemed to hold its breath as the silent standoff stretched on, each side testing boundaries without taking a single overtly aggressive move. It was a test of nerves as much as strategy on the ground, or rather across the seas. Sailors and officers felt the pressure acutely. Days of waiting, constantly checking systems, reviewing protocols, and performing drills had left them exhausted but focused. Sleep was brief, meals were hurried, and yet there was a sense of purpose that kept everyone moving. Some moments were tense, almost unbearable, when a sudden alert or report from reconnaissance demanded immediate attention. Others were quietly nerve-wracking when nothing happened but the weight of anticipation pressed down on everyone. Every individual knew that the world was watching, even if the public could not see the activity. Their work was not for recognition, it was for safety, for preventing what could have been a catastrophe. The senior official remained at the center of the operation, coordinating every move, monitoring updates, and maintaining communication with diplomats and military leaders around the world. He understood that his role was both strategic and symbolic. His calm, precise instructions reassured the teams in the field, while his careful communication with international partners kept the political situation stable. He had to ensure that every message, every signal sent to the aggressor nation, conveyed determination without provocation. It was a delicate balance, requiring not just knowledge but judgment and diplomacy. The weight of responsibility was enormous. One wrong decision could turn the world's display of unity into a flashpoint for conflict. Meanwhile, in offices and embassies across multiple continents, diplomats worked tirelessly. They were the unseen connectors between nations, relaying messages, negotiating language, and ensuring that intentions were understood. Misinterpretation could be fatal. The senior official knew that the human element in diplomacy was as important as the military presence on the seas. The coordination of military power and careful diplomacy became a single, integrated operation, each complementing the other, creating an invisible shield against escalation. The success of the operation depended on every participant, from the highest-ranking official to the sailor standing watch, understanding the gravity of their role and executing it with precision. The world outside of military and diplomatic circles, though mostly unaware of the full scale, began to feel the ripple effects. Stock markets reacted to unusual naval activity, shipping companies rerouted vessels, and news outlets speculated about global tensions. The senior official understood the delicate balance of visibility. Enough had to be visible to reassure allies and deter aggression, but not so much that panic spread among the public. Controlled communication became an art form. Every public statement, every official briefing, had to reinforce calm, stability, and preparedness. Behind the scenes, the world's response was working perfectly, but it relied on discipline and restraint both in action and in perception. On the seas, small incidents tested the coordination and discipline of the operation. Communication delays, unexpected weather, and minor mechanical issues created moments of high tension. Crews had to act quickly, often improvising solutions without waiting for direct orders. The stakes made these moments feel far heavier than ordinary technical problems. Commanders had to make instant decisions, balancing safety, operational readiness, and the overarching goal of deterrence. Even the smallest choice could ripple outward, affecting other ships, submarines, or aircraft. Despite the pressure, professionalism and training held the system together. Each challenge was met calmly and efficiently, reinforcing the strength of preparation and the skill of those involved. The senior official also spent time thinking about the ethical responsibility of the operation. The goal was not to intimidate for power's sake or to escalate conflict, but to protect civilians, trade routes, and international stability. He considered the potential impact on families near disputed waters, on sailors and pilots, and on the global population dependent on commerce and peace. His focus was on prevention, not punishment. This principle guided every decision, every maneuver, every alert, and every diplomatic communication. The human element remained at the center of the operation, reminding everyone involved why this massive mobilization was necessary. It was about more than strategy, it was about responsibility and foresight. Hours turned into days as the fleets maintained positions, constantly monitoring the situation. Reconnaissance missions flew daily, satellites provided continuous coverage, and naval ships reported any changes immediately. Every nation involved shared information, creating a network of intelligence and observation that the aggressor could not ignore. The senior official knew that this display of unity and preparedness had already influenced decisions on the other side. The presence of the world's armada, silent but unmistakable, sent a clear message: aggression would not succeed. Deterrence was not only about showing strength, it was about showing coordination, readiness, and a certainty of consequences. Relationships among the participating nations strengthened. Rivalries were temporarily set aside, replaced with a sense of shared purpose. Commanders communicated openly, shared intelligence, and coordinated maneuvers in ways that would have seemed impossible months before. It was a rare demonstration of what could be accomplished when trust and cooperation replaced suspicion. The senior official observed this quietly, recognizing that beyond the immediate crisis, a new level of collaboration had been achieved. It was a testament to what humanity could accomplish when faced with common threats, reminding everyone involved that collective action often outweighed individual ambition. The crisis remained unresolved but under control. The fleets were ready, the diplomats were engaged, and the aggressor nation had begun to reconsider its approach. The senior official reflected on the enormity of what had been achieved. Without firing a single shot, without creating panic, the world had come together to prevent disaster. The operation was a delicate dance of power, diplomacy, and human judgment, and it had worked remarkably well. The phase concluded with a cautious optimism. The immediate threat had been managed, but vigilance remained essential. The next steps would determine whether the world could turn this tense standoff into a lasting resolution. The real struggle had been both visible and invisible. Visible in the positioning of fleets and reconnaissance missions. Invisible in the careful communication, ethical considerations, and human effort that ensured the operation's success. The senior official knew that history would remember this moment, even if the general public never fully understood it. What had started as a single call had evolved into a global response that combined military power, diplomacy, and human determination. The story of this phase was one of courage, coordination, and the quiet heroism of countless individuals who worked tirelessly to maintain peace under extraordinary circumstances. The consequences of this careful, deliberate effort would shape the next phase. As the world watched and waited, hoping for a resolution without conflict. After days of tense standoffs, constant monitoring, and careful coordination, the world began to see the results of the massive operation. The fleets had maintained their positions. Reconnaissance flights had surveyed critical areas, and intelligence networks had provided continuous updates. The aggressor nation, which had initially shown bold and aggressive moves, started to hesitate. They realized the magnitude of the global response and understood that any reckless action could have consequences far beyond their control. The senior official watched the developments closely, understanding that this was the moment where patience, strategy, and unity were proving their value. Every hour that passed without conflict was a victory, demonstrating that preparation and coordination could prevent disaster without firing a single shot. The first signs of a shift came through diplomatic channels. Carefully worded messages, transmitted quietly between nations, indicated that the aggressor was reconsidering its actions. Analysts suggested that the overwhelming display of coordinated naval power had created a clear deterrent. It was not the threat of destruction alone that influenced decisions, but the undeniable fact that multiple nations were united in purpose. Commanders on the ships, though still tense, began to sense a cautious optimism. They maintained readiness, knowing that the situation could change at any moment. But the invisible pressure on the aggressor had begun to take effect. It was a unique victory, one achieved through strategy, human effort, and the careful use of intelligence rather than combat. As the aggressor withdrew from its aggressive postures, the atmosphere in the command centers changed subtly. Relief mixed with exhaustion. The senior official, who had coordinated the operation from the beginning, allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. He thought about how a single call had set in motion an unprecedented mobilization of resources, people, and cooperation. It had begun with intelligence that identified a growing threat, followed by careful planning and immediate action. Every decision along the way had relied on discipline, trust, and a shared understanding that the stakes were enormous. The success of the operation was proof that human planning, preparation, and collaboration could avert disaster in ways that might never be fully visible to the public eye. At sea, sailors and officers began to relax, but not completely. Orders to maintain readiness remained in effect and minor patrols continued. While the immediate danger had receded, the world still needed to ensure stability. Crew members who had spent long hours at sea, living in tension and uncertainty, now had a chance to rest, reflect, and feel pride in their contribution. Families and loved ones, who had endured days of worry, began to receive reassuring news. Across multiple nations, the quiet but profound impact of the operation began to settle in. It was a moment of triumph, not because of combat, but because lives were protected and a potential global crisis had been avoided. The senior official also considered the broader implications of what had just occurred. Beyond the immediate resolution, there was a lesson about international cooperation and the power of preparedness. Nations that had long been competitors or skeptics of each other had acted together in a unified manner. Commanders, analysts, diplomats, and crews had all worked toward a single goal, putting aside differences for the greater good. This level of collaboration sent a powerful message to the world. Unity and preparedness could prevent conflict in ways that brute force alone could not. It was an achievement that would shape military and diplomatic thinking for years to come. In many ways, the crisis had revealed the best of humanity's ability to act decisively, ethically, and collectively under pressure. As the fleets began to gradually return to normal operational patterns, debriefings and analysis started. Every action taken, every decision made during the crisis, was carefully reviewed. Lessons were documented for future reference, ensuring that the extraordinary level of coordination could be replicated if needed. while public attention focused on minor news reports. Behind the scenes, global security agencies understood that they had just participated in a historic moment. The senior official, although often working silently, knew that the success of the operation was a result of decades of preparation, countless hours of training, and the trust built between nations. The operation demonstrated that crises could be prevented not only with weapons, but with intelligence, planning, and collaboration. Civilians, even if unaware of the full extent of the situation, began to feel subtle changes. Trade routes normalized, shipping resumed safely, and global markets steadied. The invisible shield created by fleets and intelligence networks had allowed daily life to continue with minimal disruption. The senior official considered this one of the greatest achievements, a massive mobilization of global power that prevented disaster while maintaining peace and stability. The quiet heroism of thousands of individuals had created an outcome that might never make headlines, but it would have a lasting impact on the security and stability of nations. It was proof that preparedness, coordination, and calm leadership could shape history as effectively as battlefield victories. In reflecting on the crisis, the senior official also thought about the human cost and sacrifice involved. Sailors, pilots, analysts, and diplomats had devoted long hours under extreme pressure. They had made personal sacrifices, working away from families and enduring uncertainty. Yet they had performed with skill and dedication. Their efforts were part of the reason the operation succeeded without violence. It was a reminder that human courage and perseverance could achieve extraordinary results, even in situations where lives and global stability hung in the balance. The story of this operation was not only about strategy or power, it was about people, their choices, and their commitment to preventing harm in the face of danger. As the aggressor nation officially stepped back and normal operations resumed, the senior official allowed himself to feel cautious satisfaction. The crisis had been resolved without destruction, without casualties, and without escalation into war. It was a victory for strategy, preparation, and collective human effort. Yet, he also knew that vigilance must continue. Threats could arise again, and the lessons learned during this operation would be vital for the future. The networks, relationships, and systems that had worked so effectively were now tested and proven. But they also highlighted the ongoing need for readiness and cooperation. In many ways, the world had gained not just a peaceful resolution, but a blueprint for handling future crises. Commanders returned to bases, crews reunited with their families, and analysts completed final reports. The senior official reviewed everything one last time, noting the extraordinary coordination, the professionalism, and the resilience displayed by everyone involved. The world had faced a serious threat, and a single call had unleashed a global response capable of preventing disaster. It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful actions are not those that involve conflict, but those that demonstrate unity, readiness, and ethical leadership. The resolution of the crisis was proof that preparation, communication, and human determination could shape outcomes far more effectively than fear or force alone. In the end, the operation concluded with a sense of quiet triumph. The fleets gradually returned to standard patterns. Diplomacy continued to ensure long-term stability, and the senior official allowed a moment to reflect on what had been accomplished. Lives had been protected, trade had been safeguarded, and a potential global crisis had been averted. The story of this phase highlighted not only strategy and coordination, but also the human elements of courage, responsibility, and collaboration. It was a testament to the power of preparation and the ability of people and nations to come together in extraordinary circumstances. The world had been reminded that, in the face of potential disaster, unity, intelligence, and careful action could achieve remarkable results without a single shot being fired.